Hello, everyone. Tonight, we begin with a question about a book. One that has no title, no known author, no understandable language, and no confirmed purpose. A book made of calfskin parchment inked with care, painted with plants that no botanist can identify, and filled with symbols that whisper like riddles through time. Have you ever wondered who could have written a book no one can read in a language spoken by no one, and illustrated with diagrams of stars, herbs, and bathing women in green-tinted tubs? Join us to explore this dramatic and surprising story. Now, before you snuggle into your blanket, hit like on the video and comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's so fun to know who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit cross-legged before a dusty shelf in a forgotten library. The scent is thick, aged paper-dry air, and a faint trace of lavender from an old sachet tucked somewhere nearby. You aren't looking for anything in particular. You run your fingers along the spines of cracked leather tomes, and then there it is. It doesn't call out, it doesn't gleam, but something about it feels watchful. You slide the book from its place. The binding is a rich brown rough to the touch. Its cover has no title, no emblem. But as you lift the cover, you're met with a world that seems to blink into life. Strange script dances across each page in tight, elegant rows. It looks almost like writing, but unlike any alphabet you know, there are plants here too. Leaves with teeth like saw blades, blooms with twisted petals, roots curling into shapes that look more like gestures than growth. As you turn the pages, the illustrations change. Bathing women in deep green pools, zodiac signs, and tangled tubes like plumbing drawn by a dreamer. You frown, your fingers hesitating. These aren't random doodles. There's rhythm here, an intentionality that, or perhaps, they didn't. You've just opened the Voynich Manuscript, a book shrouded in mystery for over 600 years, a book that has inspired emperors, hoaxers, scientists, and mystics alike, a book that has never, not once, revealed its true nature to any reader. Now you close the book, gently, respectfully, and hold it to your chest. What is this thing? A medical text from a forgotten culture, a coded letter from an ancient mind, or just a prank that history refused to forget? Outside, the wind brushes against the wooden window slats. A low creak sounds in the ceiling above. You might not make it through this voyage awake, but then again, maybe this is a tale best absorbed while your defenses drift and your mind softens with the night. As you recline, you remember the first people who tried to unravel this manuscript's secrets. The 16th century scholars who stared until their eyes blurred. The Jesuits who passed it between themselves like a sacred flame. And later, the code breakers of the Second World War who could crack Nazi ciphers in minutes, but gave up on this without ever cracking a single word. But your journey is just beginning. In the stillness of the library, with the soft pages open before you, and the ancient air wrapping you like a shawl, you prepare to step into the story of a book that no one owns, and yet everyone longs to understand. Imagine holding it yourself. How does the vellum feel beneath your palm? Is it dry like bark? Or soft like worn silk? You can almost hear the rustle as a page turns, the slight tug of binding thread, the hush of ink settling into silence. It's easy to forget in our world of pixels and push alerts that once upon a time writing was an act of devotion. To write a book like this by hand over months or even years meant one thing above all purpose. And so you wonder, what was the Voynich author's purpose? You lean closer. The script curves in peculiar loops and straight slashes. Some characters resemble letters. Others look like symbols or even musical notes. Line after line, they march across the page, flowing like language, but speaking nothing. Historians still argue whether this script encodes a real tongue or merely mimics one. Some believe it to be a ciphered form of Latin. Others insist it hides a constructed language, a tongue never spoken, but carefully shaped to conceal knowledge. And then there are those who suggest it's all a hoax. Gibberish, written with just enough structure to trick the mind into searching for meaning where none exists. But hoaxes rarely endure for centuries. In this manuscript, it refuses to fade. You rest your head against the warm wood of the library table. Somewhere nearby, a lantern flickers. Outside, a nightbird calls once, then falls quiet. Maybe, just maybe, the manuscript is still waiting for someone. Someone with just the right mind, the right question, the right moment in history to finally listen in the right way. And now perhaps that someone is you. You're still here, and so is the book. Open again, resting lightly beneath your fingertips, like it's breathing, faint, shallow, steady. You scan the tight, curling script once more, your eyes adjusting to its impossible fluency. It flows like language, but evades translation. You begin to realize this isn't just about what's on the page, it's about what's missing. Because the Voynich script doesn't match anything. Not Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew, not Arabic, not Sanskrit, not hieroglyphs, not even the far-off shapes of Mongolian or Tibetan. It's as if someone invented a language entirely from scratch and then chose to never explain it. No Rosetta Stone, no glossary, no bilingual cheat sheet, just a sea of glyphs swirling in silence. You read aloud under your breath, tracing the glyphs with a whisper, Sordana, Cryptographers. The sound means nothing, and yet it feels like speech. That's the thing. Somehow this script has rhythm, even without meaning. It lulls you, almost sings to you. Some researchers have said it resembles the cadence of natural language, letter frequencies, word distributions, repeated phrases. But the words themselves, utterly unknown. Imagine inventing not just new words, but an entire alphabet. Every character unique, yet coherent. Whoever wrote this didn't just scribble at random. They created a world of symbols governed by invisible rules. Scholars have counted over 25 distinct characters, though some claim there are more than 30. They appear again and again in repeating patterns, and yet they resist all logic. And so you wonder, why would someone go through so much trouble? In 1912, when the manuscript re-emerged from centuries of obscurity, it landed in the hands of Wilfred Voynich, a Polish antiquarian and rare book dealer. You can picture him, bushy mustache, sharp eyes, elbow deep in the archives of a crumbling Italian villa owned by Jesuits. He brushes dust from a bundle of parchment and frowns. The moment he opens it, the mystery grips him. He brings it back to London and begins the long campaign of speculation, correspondence, and frustration. Was it written by Roger Bacon, the English scientist? A coded treatise on alchemy, maybe? Some said so. Wilfred certainly believed it. Others disagreed. And since then, linguists, cryptographers, mathematicians, artists, mystics, and the occasional conspiracy theorist have all taken their turn. There's a quirkier theory too. Have you heard of glossolalia? It's the phenomenon of speaking in tongues, where people utter words without known linguistic structure, often in ecstatic or spiritual states. Some suggest the Voynich manuscript is a written version of that stream of consciousness gibberish that looks like language, but is guided only by the writer's inner world. But there's a catch. The structure is too consistent. The word lengths, the way certain symbols cluster, the grammatical feel of it, it's eerily language-like. Random nonsense rarely behaves this well. So if it's glossolalia, it's a remarkably stable and patterned version. You pause a moment, maybe run your finger along the edge of the page. Feel that faint ridge where ink has pressed into parchment. You blink and notice Koa, the apprentice navigator from your memories sitting nearby. Not really, of course, but in the dreamy hush of this tale, you see him hunched over his own notes, chewing his lip, tapping a carved stick along the page. He reminds you, even the unreadable has rhythm, and rhythm might be key. Some cryptographers believe the text may use a form of algorithmic compression, a way of hiding meaning in patterns too subtle for the eye, but detectable by mathematical analysis. There's even talk of computers learning the structure of the Voynich language and creating Voynich-like gibberish with AI. It's uncanny text that looks just like the original, but was generated by a machine trained on its patterns. Meaningless, or just encoded too deeply for us to see. Historians still argue whether the manuscript has true linguistic depth or merely the illusion of it. Some are convinced there's real content underneath. Others believe we're chasing shadows. You lean back. The lamp flickers. Somewhere beyond the window, a night breeze rustles the trees. The script is still there, humming softly beneath your hands. It does not reveal. It does not explain. It only invites. What if you wonder? It isn't a code to be solved, but a performance to be experienced. What if the writer wanted you not to understand, but to dream? In a way, the manuscript acts like a mirror. Every person who stares into it sees something different. A cipher, a joke, a sacred text, a lie, a key to another world. You begin to suspect that the real mystery isn't the text at all. It's you. Now, imagine this. You're a medieval scribe, ink-stained fingers bent under candlelight. You've been instructed to copy this book. No translations, no questions, just shapes. You trace the looping glyphs line by line. They mean nothing to you, and yet after a while, they start to haunt your dreams. That's the power of the Voynich Manuscript. It wants something from you, but never says what. You glance again at the page, and though you still can't read it, you begin to feel it. The sway of symbols, the sigh of a language half remembered from a dream. The Voynich script doesn't ask to be solved, it asks to be felt. And tonight, you're beginning to understand why. The next time you lift the book, it opens to a page filled not with writing, but with plants, strange, impossible plants. You study them, leaning closer. Their roots twist like coiled rope. Their stems curve with unsettling precision. The leaves are unfamiliar. The blossoms are exaggerated, and not a single one matches any plant known to botany. And yet, they look deliberate, not fanciful, not random. Someone drew these with care that whispers, "I saw this. I touched this. I knew what this did." You recognize the layout. A stem, a flower, sometimes roots exposed. It mimics the style of medieval herbal manuscripts guides written to help healers identify plants and use them for remedies. Only here the names are nonsense, the species unknown. You flip through more pages, and the strange flora keeps coming. Sometimes there are containers beside them, or little stars. Sometimes a red blotch, like a berry or a wound. You start to wonder, is this a field guide from a forgotten world? Historians still argue whether the plants are imaginary misdrawn, or this is the wildest theory, represent species we no longer have. Could the Voynich Manuscript be the only surviving record of a vanished biome? Or is it a compilation of herbal traditions from distant lands mistranslated through time? Some botanists have tried to match parts of the illustrations, This flower looks a little like a sunflower. That leaf could be a dandelion if you squint and forgive the color. But no one has ever made a confident match for more than a few fragments. It's like someone mixed and remixed the traits of real plants to create a dream garden. You feel the page under your fingers again. It's smoother, then it looks thick and supple, like only true vellum can be. The illustrations are painted in washes of green, red, blue, and brown, faded with time, but not lifeless. You try to imagine the hand that painted them. Steady, likely, patient. Maybe that hand belonged to someone like Lonnie the Navigator, with the steady breath and the braid of coral beads at her throat. She's not real either, not exactly. But you picture her now, cross-legged by the firelight of her people grinding pigments, whispering to herself as she paints a leaf with 5 ridges that no one else will ever recognize. You catch yourself smiling. It's ridiculous and oddly comforting. You aren't alone in your curiosity, and you aren't the first. In the 1940s, botanist Hugh O'Neill thought one of the plants might be a drawing of Texas bluebonnet, a Native American flower. If true, that would suggest the manuscript came from the Americas, centuries before Europe's so-called discovery of the continent. But his theory was dismissed as wishful seeing. Still, it lingers. So too does a fringe theory that the manuscript represents a pharmacological system, an encoded guide for healing. The plants may not be real, but symbolic stand-ins for recipes perhaps. This red root is always used for fever. This curly leaf plant is used with moonlight. You can almost hear a voice chanting the recipe over the stew of crushed roots and boiling water. Some even suspect alchemy, that medieval pursuit of transmutation and elixirs. Could this be the handbook of an alchemist lost to time, one who used coded herbs, sacred measurements, symbolic plants to guide their quest? It's not impossible. Now picture yourself walking through a forest no one remembers. You bend and collect a root shaped like a question mark, a vine that bleeds when cut, a blossom that closes when you whisper to it. You bundle them gently into a cloth. And when night falls, you open a leather-bound book and draw them so no one forgets, even if no one ever understands. That's what makes this so haunting, because we still don't know what these plants are. We can't rule out anything. Maybe they're extinct species. Maybe they're metaphors for constellations. Maybe they're medicine or poetry. There's even a playful idea suggested by a historian with a glint in his eye that the book was made for dream therapy, that the plants don't come from this world, but from another. A dream realm you enter through trance, smoke, or song. In that view, this is a dreamer's field guide, a record of the flora of the subconscious. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? That someone long ago believed dreams had geography, and that it was worth mapping. You glance at Koa again. He's sketching something, too tongue pressed to his lip, his fingers stained with soot and crushed berry. He looks up, eyes wide, and whispers, "Do you think these things were ever real?" You don't answer. Instead, you nod slowly and look back at the page. The next plant has loose vines that twist into a loop, with blossoms like tiny cups. Below it, a paragraph of unreadable text curling and looping like it's dancing. If it's all nonsense, why does it feel like a song you've forgotten the words to? And if it's not nonsense, if it's real, then who saw these plants? Who wrote them down? And why did they think you might need them? You exhale long and slow. Maybe the answers aren't meant to come quickly. Maybe they come the way vines grow quietly, patiently in spirals. And tonight, you're content to wait. You blink, and the garden of strange herbs fades behind the turning of another thick vellum page. What greets you now is something stranger still. Dozens of tiny nude women wading through greenish pools. Some are connected by strange serpent-like tubes. Others seem to climb into barrels, or float in basins, or disappear halfway into chutes. Above them, constellations, or something that mimics them. Circles, stars, crescent moons, spirals, a watery cosmos framing their movements. You lean in. What on earth or beyond it is this? You tilt your head to one side, then the other, half expecting the images to suddenly align to mean something. But the logic evades you. The women have round, expressive faces with simple dot eyes and lines for noses and mouths. Some wear odd hats. Some hold on to vines. Some simply soak. You chuckle softly. It's a bit cheeky, isn't it? A medieval manuscript filled with dozens of cartoonish nymphs lounging about in celestial bathtubs. Even Koa, who's returned beside you now in your imagination, raises an eyebrow and mutters, "That's unexpected." And it is. Because here again, the Voynich Manuscript dances between worlds, 1 foot in serious scholarship, 1 foot in the surreal. These bathing women, though whimsical, appear over and over, structured into systems, posed beneath stars, lined up as if part of some elaborate diagram, and that makes them feel less like art and more like data. Historians still argue whether these are ritual illustrations, alchemical metaphors, or even cosmological charts. Some claim they show fertility practices. Others see them as instructions for celestial bathing, whatever that might mean. A few believe the pools represent organs or elements of the body seen through a mystical lens, one fringe interpretation. These are maps, not of land, but of the soul or the body, or perhaps even time itself. Each woman a marker, each vessel a moment, the tubes connecting them, a path through a realm we can't quite name. You recall that in many medieval medical texts, especially in Islamic and European traditions, illustrations of the zodiac were linked to health. There were beliefs about which star signs ruled, which body parts, when to bleed or heal, when to plant or fast. Could this be a similar kind of star body guide? Just drawn in a style unfamiliar to us. One researcher even proposed that the pools and tubes represent lymphatic systems, centuries before such diagrams entered Western science. That seems far-fetched, and yet here we are. You reach out and pretend to trace the lines between the women. The ink is still rich in places. A brown-black that bleeds slightly into the vellum. Whoever drew this did so with certainty. There's no hesitation, no smudge, no second guesses. That confidence echoes across the page. Lonnie would like this page, you think, not for its strange content, but for its symmetry. She always favored maps, and even this, you admit, feels like a map. You can almost hear her say, "It's not meant to show what is. It's meant to show how things relate." That's it, isn't it? The Voynich Manuscript isn't about naming things. It's about showing their connections. You pause for a moment and ask yourself, what if you're not supposed to read the manuscript? What if you're supposed to see it? Each bathing woman, each plant, each diagram. Maybe they're not discrete entries in an encyclopedia, but pieces in a visual grammar. A dance of forms and echoes. Something closer to music than text. And you wouldn't expect music to explain itself, would you? There's another theory, a curious one, that the women represent nymphs of the stars, spirits that guide time and tide. Some folklorists have pointed out that similar nude female figures appear in alchemical manuscripts where they serve as symbolic vessels, personifying fire, water, air, and earth. They're sometimes playful, sometimes dangerous, always liminal. And that word liminal feels right for this moment, because as you sit there, With the page open and the stars watching from above, you feel like you're standing in a doorway. Between knowledge and wonder, between reality and dream, you take a deep breath. Can you imagine standing at the edge of one of those green pools? Would you wade in, uncertain but curious? Would you whisper to the women bathing there? Ask them what they know, what they see. Would they answer in riddles, in glyphs, or would they simply smile as if to say, "You already know"? And that's the unsettling truth. The manuscript doesn't offer certainty. It doesn't explain or translate. It simply exists. And in doing so, it draws out the you that wonders and the you that dreams, and the you that never stopped being 9 years old, staring at stars and asking why. There's comfort in that. In knowing that not everything must be solved to be understood. You run a finger over the final figure on the page. A woman sitting alone, gazing upward, her tub shaped like a shell, the stars aligned above her head. She looks so small, and yet in that moment you realize she might be the author's echo, a self-portrait hidden among symbols. Watching, waiting, whispering, "I am still here." And so are you. You close the page with the bathing women gently, as though they might still be watching. The next folio reveals yet another transformation, dense pages now filled, edge to edge, with crisp, clean paragraphs of the strange Voynich script. Gone are the playful illustrations, the flowers, the pools, the vines. This section is all text, and you feel it immediately. This part of the manuscript wants to say something, or at least it pretends to. You lean in, tracing the glyphs line by line. The text flows like it was poured careful columns, neat margins, uniform spacing. No corrections, no annotations, no guides. It's as if the author wrote it all in a single breath, as though the story had been waiting to escape them for years. This section has long been called the recipes. Not because we understand any of it, but because of the way each paragraph begins with a familiar shape, like a bulleted list or a new instruction. There's a rhythm here, a cadence. It feels like steps. Boil this, mix that, burn these. Apply with care, or so people assume. You imagine yourself as an alchemist, now seated at a table, cluttered with alembics and coiled tubes. Smoke rises from a cracked ceramic dish. You mutter syllables from the page, not to cast a spell, but to keep your courage. It's not that you believe in the words, but the ritual, the repetition, makes your hands steadier. Historians still argue whether this section contains real pharmacological knowledge or symbolic instructions, a guide to preparing not just potions, but perhaps spiritual transformations. After all, many traditions blur the lines between medicine and mysticism. To cure the body is to balance the soul. One fringe theory posits that these recipes are actually coded teachings guidelines for moral or esoteric initiation. Each line then isn't about boiling herbs, but tempering the self. Add 2 drops of midnight could be a metaphor for patience. Grind the red root until silent might mean confronting anger. And so, the page transforms before your eyes. It's no longer a list of instructions, but a map of becoming. Koa stirs beside you. He's been quiet for some time, but now he lifts a carved shell from his satchel and runs his thumb across its ridges. "Do you think they knew?" he asks, not looking up. The ones who followed these steps, you don't answer right away. Instead, you glance at the marginalia, if you can call it that. Occasionally, a flower appears beside a line, or a small star. Sometimes just a swirl. No page numbers, No titles, no way to reference or confirm. That silence, that refusal to orient you, makes the manuscript feel more alive, like it's watching, testing. You imagine someone long ago using this very section as a daily ritual. Perhaps it was a healer, or a seer, or someone who simply liked the feel of repetition. Each morning, they turned the page. Each evening, they murmured the words, not knowing what they meant, but feeling their weight just the same. There's something comforting about repetition, isn't there? The way your hands remember emotion before your mind does. Stirring tea, braiding twine, tapping 3 times before sleep. And perhaps that's all this was. A comfort text, a book of repeated nothings that made sense only to one soul. A chant for the quiet hours. There's a particular line you notice now. It repeats on several pages. Of course, those aren't the real Voynich characters, but you imagine the shapes loops within loops. A tall stalk, then a narrow curl. It appears again and again, as if it's the title of each passage. Or a mantra. Some believe this section was meant to accompany oral recitation, read aloud by candlelight, or sung to a slow beat of drums. The glyphs themselves have a rhythm to their curves, and if you read them aloud, even nonsense begins to sound like poetry. You try it, quietly, almost embarrassed. Shire lo, mdaka, moltene. It's gibberish, but not unpleasant. The vowels flow. The consonants tap lightly, like wind on a sail. You think of Lani, again her braid swaying as she chants into the horizon. Not to summon anything, not to command, just to feel the world respond. A soft question for the universe, and the universe answering in silence. Another theory, one less explored, is that this part of the manuscript was never meant for anyone but the author. A personal journal, perhaps. A meditative exercise. An invented language for private thought, like children invent with imaginary friends. Only this child grew up and never stopped writing. Could you blame them? In a world that demands explanation, invention can be freedom. And here you are, centuries later, still turning those same pages, still caught in the loop. A final thought, perhaps the boldest. Some suggest the manuscript was meant to resist translation, that its purpose is to be unreadable. A rebellion against meaning. A quiet protest by someone who saw the world too clearly and chose to write a truth no one else could unlock. And maybe that's what makes it beautiful. You close the page gently, as if not to disturb its silence. The words remain waiting, not for translation, but for presence. You open the next page with a sort of reverence, now no longer expecting clarity, only company. And here, the manuscript gives you just that, its own journey. Because this time, what you're reading isn't text, or plants, or bathing stars, it's history, or at least the faint outline of it. A trail of owners, caretakers, and passersby, each touched by the mystery in their own era, each carrying it forward like a flame that refuses to die. The trail begins, as far as we can tell, in the early 17th century, but some believe it reaches much further back. The first clear name tied to the Voynich Manuscript is that of Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor, an eccentric patron of all things occult. You picture him now, broad-chested, long-bearded, seated in his palace in Prague, surrounded by alchemists, philosophers, and charlatans. He paid great sums for objects of arcane curiosity, stuffed dragons, mechanical devices, elixirs in golden vials. And somewhere in that chaotic collection, between a severed unicorn horn and a machine that promised perpetual motion, there lay the Voynich Manuscript. At least so the story goes. Rudolph supposedly purchased the manuscript for 600 gold ducats, a fortune at the time. Historians still argue whether that transaction ever happened, or whether it was a later embellishment. But if it did occur, then the manuscript was already considered valuable even when no one could read it. Imagine that. You're an emperor with the power to command armies, and what catches your imagination is a book no one can understand. Koa would get it. You glance at him now in the flicker of lantern light, his eyebrows furrowed as he listens to the tale. He's the type who would pay for mystery. Not for power, but for wonder. After Rudolf, the manuscript passed through other hands. Jacobus de Tepanex, the emperor's physician. Then, perhaps Johannes Marcus Marci, a Czech scholar, who later sent it with a pleading letter to Athanasius Kircher, the famed Jesuit polymath in Rome. And Kircher, Kircher, was the type who believed he could read anything. Egyptian hieroglyphs. No problem. Ancient Babylonian, absolutely. And so when he received this manuscript from Prague sealed, and with a note describing it as an unreadable book, he was delighted. Whether he ever managed to decode a word, we do not know. But the book remained with the Jesuits stored in the library of the Collegio Romano, locked away behind velvet ropes and the hush of holy dust. There it waited until 1912. That's when Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish-Lithuanian rare book dealer, walked into the story. He was exploring a villa in Italy, part of a Jesuit estate being quietly dismantled, and found the manuscript tucked away in a chest with other unremarkable documents. Something about it made him pause. Perhaps it was the ink, or the script, or simply that feeling again, the whisper of the unreadable. He bought it, and the moment he opened its cover, he knew he had something rare. He believed it was the work of Roger Bacon, the 13th century English philosopher and proto-scientist. That would explain the odd writing, the secretive tone. Bacon, after all, was known for using ciphers. Voynich tried to prove it. He showed the manuscript to experts, to academics, to collectors. He published sample pages and letters. He courted the press. And slowly, the mystery bloomed again. The manuscript passed next to Ethel Voynich Wilfrid's widow, then to a scholar named Hans P. Krauss, who eventually donated it to the Yale University Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where it rests to this day. You can visit it, in person, if you ever find yourself in New Haven, or online, where high-resolution scans allow curious dreamers around the world to page through it like you are now. There's something quietly beautiful in that, how a secret so old now lives in pixels. It hasn't been solved, but it hasn't been lost. Lonnie would call that balance. But here's the curious thing. Despite all these names, all these owners, we still don't know who made it. That part of its story remains blank. Like the first chapter was torn out long ago. Was it a lone scribe in a monastery, hiding their genius behind symbols? A healer in the hills, passing knowledge through coded generations? A forger, perhaps hoping to dazzle emperors and bishops with mystic nonsense? One scholar suggested it was made to be sold, not read. A luxury item for someone like Rudolf, a trophy of mystery. Another theory, it's the work of multiple hands passed down like an oral tradition in written form, growing layer by layer, glyph by glyph. A third theory whispered more than written, that the author was never known to anyone because they were not supposed to be. That anonymity was part of the ritual. You tilt the book again and catch sight of a faint watermark in the parchment. Some researchers used this detail to estimate the date of the vellum, early 1400s, likely between 1404 and 1438. That pushes its origins back. Before Rudolf, before Prague, before Voynich. It means the book was already old when it was first discovered. And that means it survived wars, fires, plagues, reforms, time itself. Somehow, it never burned, never rotted, never got discarded. Imagine how many people had to choose to keep it, not because they understood it, but because they couldn't stop looking at it. You understand that now, don't you? The longer you sit with this book, the less you demand answers. You're content with presence, with the turning of pages, with the quiet company of others who've done the same across centuries, continents, and faiths. And still the manuscript waits, not to be solved, but to be remembered. The light shifts again, as if the manuscript itself senses your deepening immersion. You've passed through plants and stars, secret alphabets, and stargazing nymphs. You've walked in the footsteps of emperors, monks, and dealers. Now the pages begin to feel older, denser, darker, heavier, with quiet. You notice the texture of the vellum changing. Slight inconsistencies, a few small holes, faint creases like veins in skin. And you realize these aren't signs of decay. They're signs of use, of contact. Many someones have turned these very pages. Not just read them, but held them, touched them, perhaps cried over them, or prayed. And now, in this still moment, so do you. You run your finger over a line of glyphs. You know by now they'll resist translation. But even your fingertip feels the depth of the ink, how it's slightly raised, almost waxy. This was iron gall ink, a favorite of medieval scribes. A mixture of iron salts and tannic acid from oak galls. Harsh, dark lasting. Scholars have confirmed it. The ink used in the Voynich Manuscript matches 15th century recipes. So too does the vellum calfskin, meticulously prepared, smoothed with pumice, stretched on racks. Carbon dating places the parchment between 1404 and 1438, which means the manuscript likely predates even the first printed books. And yet, there are no smudges, no obvious corrections, no faded sections from re-inking. Whoever made this book did so with precision in a single focused effort. You imagine that scribe now. A small window, a shaft of cold light, the squeak of quill on skin, ink pots carefully arranged, a candle burning slow and low, the hours slipping by unnoticed as line after line of symbols blossoms across the page like a spell. What drove them? You wonder. Was it duty, obsession, worship? Historians still argue whether the book was made by a monastic scribe fulfilling a commission, or by a hermetic scholar working in secret, or even by someone outside the usual halls of learning, a woman, perhaps, or a wandering healer, writing in a world that wouldn't listen. One tiny clue, barely mentioned in most texts, lies in the binding holes along the spine. Experts who've examined them say they suggest the manuscript has been rebound maybe even more than once. Originally, it may have had wooden covers, later replaced with simple vellum boards. The binding that exists today isn't original, and that's a quiet reminder. The book you hold is not just old, it's curated, preserved, adjusted, maintained. Someone cared for it. Koa tilts his head and whispers, "Do you think they read it out loud?" You're not sure, but it's easy to picture. A scholar with trembling hands, a woman in a candlelit kitchen, a child on their knees before a sick relative, chanting the glyphs not for meaning, but for memory, for the comfort of rhythm. There's a theory that the manuscript's uniformity, its consistency of spacing script flow, suggests it was written with the help of a mechanical device, a stencil, a guide, something to maintain the illusion of language. If true, it would hint at forgery, or genius, or both. But no such stencil has ever been found. And the ink shows no sign of repetition, no overlapping, no tremble of the hand. In fact, the script flows too well. Scholars note that the curves seem fluid natural, like someone who had written this script thousands of times before ever committing it to vellum. Not hesitant invention, but fluent repetition. That's why some researchers believe the author was literate in this language, whatever it is, that it wasn't invented for the book. It was used elsewhere, spoken even. But if so, where are the other texts, the other books, the letters, the scrawled graffiti? Why has nothing else been found written in this same tongue? It's as though the manuscript was born alone and has remained alone ever since. You turn another page and see one small smudge, hardly noticeable. A fingerprint, maybe. A drop of sweat. Ink brush dragged too fast. It's the only human error you've seen so far, and yet somehow it brings you closer to the writer than all the mysteries combined. Because, for that one moment, you see them not as a ghost, but as a person. They fidgeted, they rushed, they existed. You glance toward Lonnie now, appearing in your mind's eye across the room. She's sharpening a blade of obsidian with her thumb. Her eyes meet yours briefly. Maybe they weren't writing for others, she says softly. Maybe they were writing to be remembered. That idea stays with you. It hums inside your ribs. We all want to be remembered, and sometimes we write things down, not to be understood, but simply so the writing exists. The Voynich Manuscript doesn't need to make sense. It needs only to have been made. In doing so, it keeps its author alive, a pulse in ink, a breath across centuries. And now that you're here reading it with your eyes and fingers and breath, you're part of its memory too. You blink slowly, adjusting to the next page as if you've passed through a veil. Gone are the roots and nymphs and stars. The mood shifts cooler now, more mechanical. The handwriting hasn't changed, but something about these pages feels clinical, like rows of notes taken in obsessive silence. This is where the hunters arrive. You imagine them minds, sharp as blades, eyes ringed by sleepless hours, fingers twitching over cipher wheels and chalkboards. Cryptographers, linguists, code breakers, men and women who've spent lifetimes trying to crack the Voynich Manuscript like a nut made of fog. One of the first was William F. Friedman, a brilliant code breaker who helped lead the American cryptographic efforts during World War II. He and his team at the Army Signal Intelligence Service tackled enemy ciphers with ruthless precision, but the Voynich defeated them. He called it an undeciphered book, written in an unknown script. After years of work, he published nothing. No breakthrough, no key, just a deep respect for the enigma. You picture Friedman late at night, reading by lamplight, rubbing his temple, muttering to the page, "Why won't you give it up?" Historians still argue whether the manuscript is even meant to be decrypted. Some believe it's written in a lost natural language, masked by cipher. Others are sure it's a constructed language possibly invented for the manuscript alone. And then there's the unsettling possibility that it's a hoax, beautifully structured, mathematically elegant, but meaningless. But that's not what the code breakers see. They see patterns, frequencies, structures, Voynichese. Yes, the invented name for the manuscript's language has features suspiciously similar to real languages. Word lengths, positional rules, character distributions. It's as if someone knew how languages feel and sculpted one from those sensations alone. In the 2000s, AI entered the hunt. Researchers fed the manuscript into neural networks, hoping that the machine might perceive patterns where humans failed. And incredibly, some AI models did begin to categorize the glyphs, grouping them by usage, predicting what symbols might follow one another. But even the machines hit a wall. One group tried comparing Voynichese to known languages. A model said the text was most statistically similar to Hebrew. But when actual Hebrew experts looked closer, it fell apart. A different algorithm linked it to Old Turkish. Another claimed it resembled Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Some say it's Indo-European. Others say it's none of the above. You smile softly, like watching a dozen blindfolded people trying to describe an elephant, and each one touching a different dream. Even the manuscript structure plays games. It seems to have sections: botanical, astronomical, balneological. That's the bathing women, pharmaceutical, and the recipes. But the borders between them blur. There are pages out of order, loose sheets. Some folios are missing entirely. It's like reading a puzzle that rearranges itself when you blink. Koa now, fiddling nervously with his necklace, mumbles, "What if it's not a code at all?" You look at him. What if he continues? "It's just music." That isn't as strange as it sounds. One fringe theory suggests that the manuscript could encode melody, the glyphs representing not letters but notes, that it's not meant to be read but sung. If true, it might explain the text's rhythm and consistency. Perhaps it's a liturgy from a lost tradition, a chant, a spell, but no one has identified any system of music that matches the glyphs. Another theory, that it's a ciphered glossolalia, a kind of private spiritual language. The author may have believed the words came from a higher plane and simply recorded them without question. Not nonsense, but divine. Even the name, Voynich Manuscript, tells us little. It honors the man who found it, not the one who wrote it, and the true author, whoever they were, remains silent. You flip to a page near the middle. The script there is more cramped, denser, like the writer couldn't get it out fast enough. You can feel the tension. Something mattered here, something urgent, almost frantic. Imagine a mind bursting with meaning, but forced to write in symbols no one else speaks. You wouldn't write slowly. You'd pour. You take a breath and pretend for a moment. What if you could read it? What if the next line translated to, "We lived in the valleys beyond the green river, where the sky turns silver in spring"? What if it said, "Mix 3 leaves of the red vine with rainwater under a full moon"? What if it said, "This is what we were. This is what we knew. Please remember"? But it doesn't say anything. Not yet. And yet you still read, because somewhere deep in that coil of glyphs is the ghost of a human voice. Not shouting, not explaining, just whispering. A whisper that's crossed 6 centuries to reach you. And here you are, still listening. Another page, another layer of fog. You expect more lines of looping script, but instead you're met with a quiet sense of unease. This page somehow feels different. The same script, yes. The same tidy margins, careful spacing. But here it seems emptier, as if the meaning has drained away. You can't put your finger on why. You run your hand gently over the surface. Nothing is visibly wrong. And yet your mind whispers, what if this is all just gibberish? And that thought, that terrifying, tantalizing thought, has haunted every person who's ever studied the Voynich Manuscript. What if it means nothing? It's called the hoax theory, and it's been around almost as long as the manuscript itself. Some believe the manuscript is a medieval prank, a piece of pseudo-scholarship designed to dazzle wealthy collectors, or perhaps to mock the absurd complexity of real alchemical texts. Imagine a clever monk or scribe who knew that royalty loved secrets, who crafted an unreadable book just for the pleasure of watching kings scratch their heads. If that's true, then it worked brilliantly. Rudolph II, who may have bought it for 600 ducats, was obsessed with esoterica. What better gift for a monarch obsessed with alchemy than a book no one could decode? And yet, there's a problem with this theory, a big one, because creating convincing gibberish at this scale is almost impossible. Modern linguists have pointed out that the Voynich manuscript displays a number of linguistic features that suggest genuine structure, consistent entropy, a statistical measure of information density, word length distribution, positional dependencies. Put simply, it looks like language, too much so to be random. To fake something with this much internal consistency over hundreds of pages with no repetition of large blocks, no obvious patterns reused lazily, it would take an extraordinary level of planning. You'd almost need to invent a language and then write fluently in it. And if someone did that in the 1400s, they were far ahead of their time. Historians still argue whether any known hoax from that era, or even the next few centuries, comes close to this level of complexity. There's no precedent. That's why many experts dismiss the hoax theory. But still, it lingers, like a draft in an old house. You don't want to believe it's there, but sometimes you feel it anyway. Koa breaks the silence, chewing on his knuckle. What if it's both, he says. A hoax that somehow became real. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs, like someone made it up. But then others saw it, and believed, and poured meaning into it, until it stopped being fake. You smile faintly. That's not so far from what we do every day, is it? We make stories. Then we live by them. And maybe the Voynich Manuscript is the same. A trick that turned into a mirror. There's also a psychological theory that the manuscript's appeal lies in its invitation to solve. Our brains are wired to seek patterns, to chase meaning. When we look at something almost understandable, we can't help but project understanding onto it. You're doing it now. Every time you look at the script, your brain tries to read it, even though it can't. That tension between recognition and resistance is part of the manuscript's strange hold. And then there's the theory of semantic satiation, when you repeat a word so many times that it loses meaning. The Voynich does the opposite. It never had meaning, but it feels like it should. And so you stare longer. Hoping, projecting, dreaming. It's not nonsense. It's anti-sense. You flip to another page. More of the same. A line of text curves around a flower. A woman in a tub. A star. A root. A circle. A glyph that resembles a question mark. And again that doubt creeps in. What if it's all for show? But then you catch something new. In the corner of the page, a tiny mark. It's not like the rest. It's almost a doodle. A small round face. 2 dots. A mouth crooked. Someone smiled here. You stare at it for a long time. Maybe the scribe was bored. Maybe they slipped. Or maybe just maybe they left it for you. A sign, not of meaning, but of presence. You're not alone. Someone else has been here. Someone else stood at this exact place in the spiral and decided to leave a grin. Lonnie peers over your shoulder. A joke, maybe? You nod. Or a gift. In the end, you don't know. And that's the point. The manuscript resists closure. It defies the neatness of explanation. That's why it endures. Why no AI, no cryptographer, no historian has broken it yet. It whispers, "You can almost understand me." And we love that almost more than answers. You shut the page softly. Let the mystery stay. You're deep in now. Past the trap doors of logic, beyond the thresholds of language, into the heart of something stranger than forgery and older than scholarship. As you turn the next page, something inside you quiets. Because this page, this one feels like a whisper from someone real. The handwriting hasn't changed, nor has the paper. The same curling script, the same sepia lines, the same impossible consistency. But here you pause and feel it, a human pulse. It begins with a diagram. Circles nested inside circles. Starbursts, what looks like sun rays. Around the edges, more text. But this time, the script seems looser, freer. There's emotion in the line work. Not haste, but something like urgency. And beside the diagram, a small smudge, faint, the shape of a fingertip. You place your own finger there gently and let yourself wonder, who touched this page first? And that's when you ask it the next big question. Who wrote the Voynich Manuscript? Not just when or where, but who? What sort of person could create such a thing? And why would they do it? Historians still argue whether the manuscript had one author or many. The consistency of the handwriting suggests a single scribe, but the complexity of the drawings, the thematic shifts between sections, it's possible others were involved. A team, a small circle, a master, and an apprentice. You picture Koa. Again, nervous fingers stained with ink. Perhaps he was one of them long ago, or someone like him. Curious, patient, quiet. There's a theory that the author may have been a woman. It's not as fringe as it once sounded. Several illustrations show what appear to be female figures, not idealized, not stylized, but ordinary women. Bathing, walking, reaching. Scholars have pointed out the unusual attention paid to female anatomy and rituals involving water. Could it have been the work of a midwife or an herbalist recording generations of oral knowledge in a script known only to her circle, a kind of protective secrecy in a time when women's knowledge was often dismissed or worse, punished? You think of Lonnie again, sitting cross-legged in torchlight weaving chant into fiber, her eyes half closed. She doesn't write often, but when she does, every line matters. There's even an idea, whispered between anthropologists, that the manuscript represents a marginalized culture, forced to encode their language as protection. A lost community, or even an individual who refused to be silenced. Their voice remains in a script we no longer speak. Others have proposed madness, that the author may have suffered from some form of disordered thinking, a compulsion to invent, to build systems without end. A savant syndrome, perhaps. Someone who created a world not to communicate but simply to have it. The name Antonio Avellino comes up, a 15th century architect known for his eccentric designs. Some researchers believe he could have authored the manuscript as a kind of architectural manifesto, disguising his ideas in symbol and allegory. Another theory points to John Dee, the English occultist and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee had access to rare texts, spoke multiple languages, and was obsessed with angelic communication. Could the manuscript have been one of his experiments in Enochian, his supposed language of the angels? But here's the problem. There's no proof. No initials, no colophon, no ownership stamps. The manuscript lacks the usual signs of self-reference, as if the author wanted to disappear entirely, to become voice not name. And maybe that's why it endures, because without an author, the book becomes a vessel. Anyone can project onto it. The mystic, the scientist, the dreamer, the skeptic, the child. You, the author, vanishes and you step in. You turn the page again. A cluster of glyphs curves like wind-blown reeds. They mean nothing. And yet you feel a wave of melancholy, as if the author was trying to leave something behind, something only they could read. That brings you to one last theory. Quiet, fragile, beautiful. That the manuscript was written by someone for themselves. A personal language invented in solitude. Not for profit, not for glory, but as an act of inner preservation. A secret garden, a diary, a conversation with the self. If so, then the Voynich Manuscript is not a code or a joke or even a message. It's a mirror. One person's attempt to map their own mind. And in reading it, you glimpse your own. You close your eyes. Imagine the author now, whoever they were at the final page. Candle low, ink running dry. They lean back, flexing sore fingers, heart heavy with the knowledge that no one else will ever understand what they've written. And yet, they write it anyway. Because the act itself is enough. Because what they wanted wasn't translation. It was to be held. And here you are, centuries later, holding it. The candle flickers low in your imagined room, casting long, soft shadows across the manuscript's curling pages. You've walked so far into the mystery now that turning back feels impossible, not that you'd want to. Because even though the Voynich Manuscript still says nothing you can understand, it has begun to speak in other ways, not in words, but in themes. And this next section pulls you somewhere curious, into the roots, leaves, and stems again. But this time, not as illustrations. Here, the text and image seem to blend. Columns of script wrap around jars, and leaves linking roots to recipes, petals to paragraphs. It almost looks practical. You picture a workbench, cluttered with tools, a mortar and pestle, small clay pots, bundles of dried herbs. A hand reaches out, trembling slightly, and opens the Voynich Manuscript to this page. Not for curiosity, not for fun, but for guidance. That's the heart of this theory, that the Voynich Manuscript is at its core a medical manual. A book of plant lore instructions, diagrams, and treatments from a time and place we no longer remember. Historians still argue whether the manuscript represents real-world healing practices or some kind of symbolic or spiritual system. But either way, this section, often called the pharmaceutical section, carries a tone of utility. The plants here are smaller, shown with parts labeled or paired with vessels, as if to say, this root for fever, this blossom for pain, crush this with oil, steep that in the dark. It echoes the format of known herbals from medieval Europe and the Islamic world. Books like Dioscorides de Materia Medica or Hildegard of Bingen's Physica, blending observation, medicine, and mysticism. But again, the plants don't match anything in reality, and neither does the script. So you find yourself floating between two truths. This feels like medicine, but we can't prove it. Some researchers have speculated that the plants are composites, amalgams of several herbs drawn as one to obscure their identity from outsiders. Others think they may represent alchemical ingredients, symbolically drawn roots that aren't roots, but metaphors for minerals, blossoms that stand in for stars. A few more daring scholars propose that the manuscript records the botanical knowledge of a lost civilization, that it preserves a medical system, names diagrams, preparation methods that once existed but is now completely erased. Think about that. An entire worldview gone. Except for this. Koa turns the page beside you. His brow is furrowed, but not in confusion. In reverence. This was someone's cure, he whispers. You believe him. There's a drawing of a long stem topped with a blue ink bloom. Beneath it, a squat jar with a spout. The text curls around both like ivy. It's tempting, so tempting to imagine you can read it. Steep in rainwater. Heat at dawn. Whisper to the fire as it boils. You smile. Even if it's nonsense, it's beautiful nonsense. In recent years, linguists used statistical models to examine the text's internal structure. One striking discovery: the words near certain drawings appear more frequently in certain combinations, suggesting semantic groupings. In plain terms, the text behaves as if it's describing what's nearby. That lends weight to the medical theory. The symbols might not be language in a traditional sense, but coded reference, each one standing for a property, A use, a danger, a preparation. You lean back, squinting. What if the manuscript is a mnemonic system? A way of encoding knowledge, not to be read, but to be remembered. That would explain the rhythm of the script, its musical quality, the loops and refrains. Imagine a teacher reciting it to apprentices, not for grammar, for memory. Lonnie speaks softly now, her voice like wind over the deck of a canoe. It's not just what we know, she says, it's how we remember it. And that idea resonates deeply because memory isn't always linear or literal. Sometimes we remember in pictures, in half phrases, in rituals and textures. And maybe the Voynich Manuscript is a memory preserved in just that way. There's even a folk belief tucked into a corner of herbal tradition that certain plants can only be harvested when named properly. That the act of naming completes the plant's power. If so, the names in the Voynich text are not decorations. They're spells. The glyphs may be incantations, chants, even protective bindings for the remedies. You don't just read them, you perform them. And isn't that the same with so much ancient knowledge? We don't always understand the why, but we keep the how, the turning of the page, the careful grind of the pestle, the hum of syllables while water boils. Not superstition, but care. That's what you feel here in this section. More than mystery, more than science, care. Someone made this to help someone else. And though the names are lost and the cures unknown, that intention still lingers. Like a scent in the pages, like warmth in the ink. And so you sit quietly breathing it in, not trying to solve, just trying to honor. You take a moment before turning the next page. The quiet has grown thick around you, like mist or memory. The book breathes beneath your hands. You're not just reading now, you're listening. Listening to something that isn't a voice exactly, but something older than language. Maybe older than even understanding. The page opens to yet another shift. Gone are the jars and herbs. Instead, diagrams bloom across the parchment, like constellations, spirals, circles, lines that twist like nerves or paths. And in between, the glyphs again, curling along the edges, anchoring each figure like captions from another dimension. You lean forward, because this is where one of the boldest theories begins to stir. What if this book is the last surviving evidence of an entire lost civilization? It sounds wild, doesn't it? But pause, just for a heartbeat, and imagine. You're holding the only surviving artifact from a culture that left behind no cities, no temples, no tools, just this. One manuscript out of place and out of time, speaking in a language the world never knew existed. And for centuries it's been right here, whispering, waiting. Historians still argue whether this idea, this lost civilization hypothesis, has any grounding in evidence. The manuscript contains no maps, no names, no context, nothing to tie it to a region or people. But then again, if such a civilization vanished completely, what else could we expect? There are precedents. We've uncovered cultures through a single fragment, a shard of pottery, a carving in stone, a burial site with artifacts, but no name. If the Voynich Manuscript is real, it could be the tip of an iceberg, already melted. Some researchers point to the manuscript's lack of European reference points. No Latin, no Christian symbols, no familiar mythology. The stars are unfamiliar, the plants unrecognizable. Even the people, those wide-eyed women, don't match medieval European ideals of beauty or symbolism. It feels elsewhere. There's one especially tantalizing theory that the manuscript may have come from Asia, possibly from a now vanished group in Central or East Asia. Others propose Mesoamerica, citing symbolic echoes of Aztec codices and early Nahuatl scripts. There are those who go further still. They suggest the manuscript may have been created by a pre-Phoenician culture or by refugees from a sunken island Atlantis, reborn in glyphs and herbs. A fringe idea, yes, but not without its loyal defenders. You glance at Koa. He's sitting up straighter now, brow furrowed. If this came from a vanished people, he says maybe they knew something we don't. You nod slowly. Perhaps their knowledge was rooted in natural systems, medicine, stars, water plants, knowledge that didn't survive conquest or colonization, knowledge recorded in symbols that were never meant for outsiders. And here's a curious detail. The structure of the manuscript doesn't resemble books from the 1400s. It reads more like a manual or a ritual guide. A few researchers have suggested that the book may have come from a culture without a literary tradition at all. A culture that invented writing solely for this one purpose, then disappeared before it could spread. That idea is haunting. A single language manuscript. No copies. No translations. No footnotes. Just this. And if the people who made it were destroyed or absorbed or lost, then the manuscript becomes something truly unique, a monument of thought, untethered from any surviving tradition, a fossil of intellect. Lonnie speaks now, her voice low. When we sail, she says we carry stories across the ocean. But if no one remembers the stories, you know the rest. They sink. And maybe this book is all that floated back up. You reach for the page again. The diagrams seem to twist the more you look. Some spiral in on themselves like seashells. Others stretch outward like navigation charts. A few resemble celestial maps, but not our constellations. It's as if someone mapped a sky we no longer see, or an inner world we've forgotten how to name. There's one spiral that pulls your attention. Around its edge, tiny glyphs march like footprints, each one carefully spaced. It's hypnotic. You let your eyes follow the loop inward, your breath syncing with its rhythm. Could it be a calendar? A map of cycles? A spiritual journey? A mnemonic tool? One scholar proposed, the spiral is a representation of time, not linear, but cyclical. Another claimed it mirrored the pattern of fermentation, a symbolic guide to transforming matter. The truth, no one knows. But you feel it, the weight of it, the echo, and something strange stirs in you. Not confusion, not frustration, but empathy. Whoever made this, whoever spent years, maybe decades, drawing each figure, inventing each glyph, staining each page with ink and meaning, they believed in it. They believed it would endure, and it has, even without translation, even without context. Because meaning isn't always something you can summarize. Sometimes it's something you feel in your chest. A pull, a hush, a sense that someone somewhere once dreamed deeply, and that dream is still here, fluttering quietly in the folds of a book. You close your eyes. For just a moment, you believe. The page turns more slowly this time, as though it's resisting, like the manuscript knows you're getting close to something you aren't supposed to see. Or maybe something it's been waiting for you to notice. Because here, in this quiet space between drawings and script, a strange idea has begun to form. What if the manuscript isn't just about what it says, but how it's felt? That question guides you now, as you settle into what may be the most curious theory of all. The Voynich Manuscript as a survivor of oceanic memory. A possible echo of seafarers who left no temples, no towers, no stone roads behind, only waves, wines, stars, and stories. Yes, now we drift into the Polynesian winds. Not because the manuscript came from Polynesia. There's no direct evidence of that, but because some scholars, artists, and dreamers have noticed strange, subtle similarities between the Voynich's mysterious glyphs and the petroglyphs carved by early seafaring peoples across the Pacific. Wavy lines, spirals, glyphs that look like maps drawn by those who read the ocean like parchment. You imagine now that you're aboard a great outrigger canoe. The moon is high. Lonnie's voice drifts from the stern, murmuring a chant older than the stars. Koa leans over the edge, trailing his fingers in the black water. And you hold a shell map in your lap lines made of string nodes of coral. It makes no sense to the untrained eye, but to you, it's language. That's what some say the Voynich Manuscript might be a relic not of place, but of practice. A written form of something that was once only passed orally. A codification of a culture's observational knowledge, tides, migrations, seasonal shifts, herbal lore, celestial cycles. Imagine a culture at the brink of transformation. Navigators turning into archivists, chants becoming diagrams, memory becoming script. You turn another page, another whirl of stars, and again the text wraps the edges like wind curling around a sail. Historians still argue whether the symbols of the Voynich Manuscript are even alphabetic. Some believe they represent syllables or whole words like logograms. That would align with proto-writing systems like Rongorongo from Easter Island, or the undeciphered Indus script, where symbols evoke concepts more than sounds. You stare now at a column of repeated symbols, each one gently different from the last, as if slowly evolving. Could this be a chant written out phonetically? Each line a verse. Each twist in the shape, a change in breath or tone. Some digital linguists ran entropy analyses and found that the Voynich glyphs are statistically more predictable than English, but still within the range of natural language. That suggests it could be a system for spoken ritual, not scientific description. Lonnie speaks again, barely above a whisper. Some things aren't meant to be read, only remembered. You nod. And maybe, just maybe, this manuscript was not a book in the modern sense, but a kind of portable altar. A sacred object used by one person or a chosen few. A thing to chant over, not decode. A text to bless the canoe before departure. To name the stars before sleep. You run your fingers over a particularly elegant glyph, two curves crossing like a bird's wing in flight. And without realizing it, you trace the shape in the air again slowly. As if it matters. Maybe that's the point. One researcher observed that many of the Voynich glyphs resemble body motion. Curves that echo gesture, lines that suggest breath. Could the script be a mnemonic dance? A choreography of meaning that would place the manuscript in the realm of embodied knowledge. A system where meaning lives not in the mind alone, but in movement, in memory, in repetition. You close your eyes and try to feel it. Try to imagine the manuscript not as a riddle, but as a ceremony. One that begins the moment you open it. One that never ends. In that light, its indecipherability isn't a failure. It's a feature, a kind of protection. Because to read too easily is to forget too quickly. But to struggle, to linger, to stay just outside the edges of comprehension, that stays with you. You glance at Koa. He's sleeping now, curled beside a bundle of leaves. Lonnie hums a low, steady tone as she steers. And you, still holding the manuscript, begin to understand why no one has ever solved it. Because some stories aren't meant to be unlocked. They're meant to be carried, like shells strung along a cord, like stars mapped by memory, like a chant whispered from one voyager to another. And suddenly, the manuscript feels less like a puzzle and more like a companion. It doesn't want you to win. It wants you to walk with it, and in doing so, become part of the story yourself. You wake perhaps from a half-dream. The air is still. The pages rest beneath your fingers like pressed leaves. The Voynich Manuscript hasn't moved. It never does. And yet you feel it has carried you across entire oceans since you first cracked its cover. You're close now to something. Not to the solution, no. That would be too small a word. What the manuscript offers isn't an answer, but a way of seeing. A lens, perhaps, or a mirror. And this next page is unlike any you've seen before. It holds a circular diagram, tight, intricate humming with geometry. Inside it, figures. Tiny. Difficult to make out. Not plants, not stars, not women in baths. These look like structures, something architectural, maybe even mechanical. There's a sense of design here, a system, and the script dances around it in lines like notes scribbled around a compass rose. You lean in. This might be the heart of it. Some scholars have speculated that this page, and others like it, represent machines of thought, not literal machines with gears and levers, but symbolic ones. Diagrams that map out mental processes or cosmologies or the interlocking functions of a worldview now vanished. Historians still argue whether these pages belong to alchemical tradition or something more esoteric. Some say they echo Rosicrucian imagery. Others see traces of Kabbalistic diagrams. Still others believe they are wholly original, an invented system of thought, recorded nowhere else in human history. Imagine that the only surviving artifact of an idea. You wonder, was this the author's proudest page, the centerpiece, the blueprint? You can feel their intent bleeding through the parchment, stronger here than anywhere else. They meant this page. They cared about it. You trace the spiral slowly with your fingertip. The lines don't lead outward. They wind inward, as though the journey isn't away from mystery but toward it. And that idea settles in your chest like warm stone. The author wasn't trying to explain the world. They were trying to understand themselves within it. You picture the scribe, again perhaps older now. Their hand trembles more. Their lines are less precise, but their heart is louder. They don't write to be understood anymore. They write because the act itself is prayer. They invent symbols, not to hide, but to hold something sacred. It's a sensation, you know. Have you ever written something you couldn't say aloud? Something for yourself and no one else? A poem, a drawing, a note you never sent. Then you've met the Voynich author in spirit. There's another theory, a tender one, that the manuscript was written by someone whose language was stolen, that they were the last of their kind, and this book, a final act of resistance. A garden planted in exile. Lonnie would understand that. She always writes names in the sand before pushing off from shore, not because they'll last, but because she needs to say them, to remember. And maybe this diagram you now hold is the same. A name written in symbols, a self-composed entirely of spirals and stars and scripts that never bow to translation. Some linguists once tested the manuscript using Zipf's law, a principle that governs how often words appear in natural language. The results? Voynich's fits the pattern. Another researcher ran a simulation comparing the glyph's entropy to that of various real languages. The manuscript wasn't random. It had rules, but rules known only to the one who made them. And so here's a strange truth. The Voynich Manuscript might be the most private book ever written, not because it's locked, but because it speaks only to one soul. Everyone else. We're just eavesdropping on a conversation between a person and their own mind. And yet, don't you feel included? Isn't that the paradox? You can't understand it, and still you feel something stir. Something ancient, something tender, a longing perhaps, for the kind of language that's not taught, but felt. The kind that sings in symbols, that wraps its meaning in a cloak, not to deceive, but to protect. There's a phrase whispered by those who study the manuscript long enough. The Voynich doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be heard. You turn one more page. The diagram's quiet again. The text flows, and you're back with the script not as code, but as company. You imagine a world in which this was not strange, in which everyone around the author spoke this same language, knew these same symbols, walked the same path. Maybe that world never existed, or maybe it did, and it slipped between the cracks of history, leaving behind only this one stubborn, radiant trace. Koa looks up at you now, eyes wide with something like wonder. Do you think they ever imagined someone like us would be reading this? You glance at the manuscript, then at him. No, you say, but I think they hoped, and so you keep going, because hope is not just an emotion. It's a form of writing. You've reached the final page now, or what passes for one, because the Voynich Manuscript doesn't end with a flourish or a final sentence. There's no finis no amen, no signature to mark the close. The last folio is simple text heavy, undecorated, almost hesitant. The glyphs shrink slightly, crowd the page more tightly. There's no obvious farewell, just a fading whisper, and you sit there quietly, letting it settle. It's like the book has walked you to a threshold, and then simply stopped, as if to say, you've seen enough. The rest is yours to dream, but this final section, this culmination, deserves reflection. Because here, the glyphs flow with a strange urgency. Some letters tilt more sharply. The lines press a little closer together, like someone writing in the dimming light. You sense that the author knew this would be the end, and yet they didn't break the rhythm. The script continues in the same elegant hand, repeating familiar shapes and combinations, as though they had one last breath to give and gave it in full. There's a word that appears more often on this last page than anywhere else. We can't translate it, but its shape repeats again and again, like a heartbeat. You whisper it under your breath, not to solve it, but to honor it. There's a theory that this final page is a closing prayer, a ritual farewell, that it mirrors the structure of liturgical endings and other sacred texts, formulas that signal conclusion, rest, and release. Historians still argue whether this section was part of the original plan or added later by a hand still faithful to the mystery. But the ink matches, the style too, and there's something peaceful here. Even without meaning, it feels complete. Lonnie appears again beside you, her braid tied back with a strip of cloth. She kneels, rests a hand on the edge of the parchment. It's not the end, she says gently. It's a pause. Koa stirs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Or a seed, he murmurs, planted for someone else to find. And you nod, because that's exactly what it feels like. This book, so silent, so strange, wants to be found. Not deciphered. Found, held, wondered over. There's no map to its origin. No date. No author's name. And yet, it has reached across 600 years to sit here in your lap. It has passed through kings and monks, collectors and scholars, scribes and machines, and now you. You. Do you feel its warmth? Do you feel the hand that once pressed ink to vellum, believing, despite everything, that someone someday would read it? Because whether or not you can understand the Voynich Manuscript, you are now part of its story. You've followed the plants through impossible gardens. You've bathed with star maidens in pools of green light. You've traced diagrams of mind and cosmos. You've held the gaze of a language that refuses to bow, and in return, the manuscript has let you in. That's its final gift, to allow you to feel meaning even where none can be proven, to remind you that mystery is not a failure of knowledge, it's the invitation to wonder. You breathe in. You remember how it began. You in a quiet room, dust dancing in lamplight. The pages opening like a door. The script waiting like a hush. And now, you exhale. You're changed. Because the truth is, the manuscript didn't need to be solved to speak to you. It spoke anyway, to the quiet parts of you, the dreaming parts, the parts that still believe in lost civilizations and secret languages. And the idea that a person can write a book, not to be read by many, but to be felt by one. Maybe that person is you. And maybe that's enough. You linger a moment longer, with the final page open, fingers gently resting on the edge of the parchment, as though afraid that closing it might end something more than a story. But as you sit there, quiet still, you realize something profound. The Voynich Manuscript has never been about the destination. It's about the movement, the turning of pages, the tilt of the head, the drawn breath as your eyes meet each looping glyph. It's about the journey. You retrace your steps in your mind, and already the memories begin to flicker like firelight. You remember the first page, the whispering script, the impossible plants, the sense that someone long ago had drawn from a garden no one else could see. You remember the bathing women floating in green pools under constellations that have no names. You remember the diagrams, the circles, the strange logic that flowed like water and never stood still. You remember Koa, the wide-eyed apprentice with inky fingers and his restless questions. You remember Lonnie, her voice like tides, her steady presence beside you when the script felt too vast, too silent. You remember Tua, the elder, who spoke only once but carried wisdom in the carved staff he never put down. Together, you navigated not just a manuscript, but a memory, a long-forgotten thought, preserved in ink and breath and the hush of vellum. And now, in the stillness of this closing moment, you realize that the Voynich Manuscript has become something else entirely. Not a riddle, not a message, but a mirror. It has reflected back your own wonder, your need to ask even when no answer is promised, your willingness to listen even when the voice is indecipherable, your quiet belief that some things don't need to be understood to be loved. Because haven't you felt that before? Standing before an ancient ruin, listening to a lullaby in a language you don't speak, watching stars turn in a sky your ancestors once named. That's what the Voynich offers. Not clarity, but connection. And in that, it is deeply achingly human. You let your hand fall gently across the manuscript's cover. You don't close it yet, not quite. Because in some quiet part of you, the story hasn't ended. The glyphs are still curling behind your eyes. The spiral diagrams are still spinning beneath your breath. The plants still sway. You think again of the theory that the Voynich Manuscript is the last surviving fragment of a lost world, that it holds the dreams, rituals, cures, and wisdom of people whose names were never carved in stone. And whether or not that's true, the manuscript has fulfilled its purpose. It has survived, and more than that, it has reached you. That is no small miracle. You glance at Koa one last time, asleep now, with his cheek pressed to his hands. Lonnie has vanished into the wind, her sail trimmed and humming with starlight. Tua has returned to shadow, but their presence lingers like the hum of a chant you can't stop hearing. You smile, and slowly, gently, you close the book. The weight is not lighter, but your heart is. Now the lights are soft, the air is still, and the Voynich Manuscript, quiet once more, rests beside you, not as a puzzle, but as a companion. Thank you truly for joining me through every emotion, every turn, every moment of this journey. It's been an adventure, and I'm grateful to share it with you. As we close this tale, I wish you a peaceful evening. May you have a restful night, deep sleep, and dreams filled with wonder and light. Rest well, you've earned it. And when you're ready for the next story, I'll be here waiting to journey with you again. Before you go, if you loved this tale, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what moved you surprised you, or lingers with you long after the story ends. Until we meet again, good night, and see you in the next adventure.